Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving straight into an absolutely fascinating diagnostic report. We've got advanced AI models like ChatGPT and DeepSeek analyzing a really unusual legal battle. It's the case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan. And honestly, this is a story that perfectly captures exactly what happens when ancient traditional legal logic collides head-on with modern network science. So let's start with a really profound question that just sits right at the very center of this entire case. Can a single, solitary retweet from an account with fewer than 100 followers actually cause systemic social collapse? Now, your gut reaction is probably, well, obviously no, right? But a court of law actually decided otherwise.
Yeah, that single retweet resulted in a 20-month prison sentence for Dr. Chen, who is a physical science PhD. He was hit with a charge of picking quarrels and provoking trouble. The AI models actually noted that this statute is often referred to as a pocket crime, just because it's so broadly used as a catch-all. Basically, he was accused of spreading false information that severely disrupted public order.
So today we're going to impartially review how these AI models broke down this exact clash. Because it's wild. On one side, you have linear judicial logic, this very rigid belief that action A directly, neatly causes consequence B. And then on the other side, you have the nonlinear, messy reality of modern network science. It's just a brilliant case study of old world rules meeting new world physics.
Let's jump into Section 1, the missing legal pillars. We're going to deconstruct the crime itself.
Now, as you know, to actually convict someone, the law requires strict proof across several key pillars. But when the AI models systematically audited these court documents, they found some massive disconnects. Take a look at this. The law explicitly requires fabricated facts, right? But the evidence presented was mostly just subjective opinions or even art. The law requires severe disorder, but absolutely no measurable disorder was proven. And those strict numerical thresholds you usually need for views and retweets, also not proven. So according to the combined analysis from Gemini and ChatGPT, literally all four of the fundamental legal pillars were just missing. Think about it. The behavior itself was just a low-intensity retweet, not an original post, a retweet. The objects in question were satire and opinions, things you can't even objectively prove as false in the first place. And on top of all that, there was absolutely zero transmission data to show any actual real-world disruption whatsoever. In fact, ChatGPT was pretty blunt about this. It specifically categorized this whole situation as a highly unusual legal intervention. The AI basically concluded that this was a textbook example of treating speech acts as a crime, but without actually proving that the speech ever reached the necessary threshold for real harm or spread. Moving on to Section 2, the physics of networks. Here, we're exploring the micro, meso, and macro scales. Okay, this is where things get really fascinating. The defense actually brought in real network physics to test these legal claims. Starting at the micro level, they applied something called the Galton-Watson branching process. Now, to put that simply, this is a mathematical model. It's actually used a lot in epidemiology to figure out if a transmission chain, like a virus or a rumor, is going to spread like wildfire or just die out. The whole thing hinges on a key metric called mu, which is the average reproduction number. So the court just assumed linear causation. Basically, he posted it, boom, it caused chaos. But the AI models point out a massive flaw here, because this specific account had fewer than 100 followers and practically zero engagement. That mu number was vastly less than 1. In the physics world, they call this subcritical extinction. What that means is it is mathematically impossible for this to spark a wider information fire. The chain literally dies out almost instantly. Now, zooming out a bit to the meso level, the defense applied the Cohen threshold formula. This proved that the defendant was just a tiny, insignificant edge node. See, in complex networks, only massive hub nodes, the big players, have the power to actually alter the system. Edge nodes? They're totally structurally isolated. As Copeland noted in its analysis, whether you remove or activate an edge node, it has essentially zero impact on the overall network. It's just a drop in the bucket. And finally, looking at the macro scale, DeepSeek and Copilot both highlighted what's known as the micro-macro fallacy. We all know social media platforms are these incredibly massive, complex systems. Any large-scale chaos you see is an endogenous result of built-up pressure across the entire platform. It is absolutely not something caused by one isolated edge node. The AI models put it perfectly. You simply cannot blame a single grain of sand for an entire desert avalanche. It just doesn't work that way. Which naturally leads us to an incredibly important question.
I mean, if the math and the physics definitively prove that it was literally impossible for this account to cause systemic chaos, how on earth did the conviction hold up? Well, this brings us to some of the most striking procedural findings from the AI's entire audit.
That takes us to Section 3, Procedural and Logical Flaws. We're going to look at the trial breakdown. Okay, so when the science doesn't support the verdict, digging into the judicial process itself usually reveals exactly why. And ChatGPT heavily critiqued the trial's logic here, especially regarding subjective intent. The court actually didn't have any hard evidence that Dr. Chen knew he was doing something wrong. Instead, and get this, they argued that because he's a PhD student, his high education meant he should have known better. The AI models rightly pointed out that equating someone's cognitive ability with criminal intent completely violates the basic presumption of innocence.
But wait, it gets worse. Copilot identified a severe procedural flaw during the appeals process. The appellate court actually demanded that the defendant provide new evidence to prove his innocence. I want you to really think about that for a second. In criminal law, the whole foundation is that the prosecution must prove guilt. So demanding that a defendant prove their innocence, that illegally flips the entire burden of proof completely upside down. So what the AI models mapped out here is just a total procedural breakdown. We're talking about a secret first instance trial, a detailed network science defense that was completely ignored, an appeal handled without even having a hearing, and of course the burden of proof being illegally shifted. Ultimately, the court's original, deeply flawed assumptions were just kept completely insulated in a bubble, totally safe from any actual scientific reality.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 4, Law versus Complex Systems. Let's look at the resolution.
So what actually happens when a very rigid linear legal system tries to regulate a messy, non-linear digital world? Well, DeepSeek and Copilot pointed out something really fascinating. To justify this conviction, the court essentially leaned on the butterfly effect. You know, that whole idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in one place can cause a tornado in another. But here's the thing. A literary metaphor is absolutely not a substitute for the strict scientific proof demanded by criminal law. You just cannot send someone to prison based on poetry.
And that's really the big takeaway here. Across all the AI analysis we looked at, whether we're talking about ChatGPT, Copilot, DeepSeek, or Gemini, the objective conclusion was completely unanimous. The legal math simply did not add up. Our traditional frameworks, which rely heavily on this flawed idea of linear causation, are just struggling massively to measure or even understand our modern digital reality. So we want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As our world becomes increasingly governed by these massive, complex, hyper-connected networks, how are our old linear legal systems ever going to adapt? Because if courts just continue to ignore the basic physics of the digital age, cases like Dr. Chen's aren't going to be an anomaly anymore. They're going to become a permanent feature of a system that just fundamentally no longer understands the world it's trying to police. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the systems around you.